Michael Bloomberg is a significant figure. He was the mayor of New York from 2002 until 2013. He owns a very big financial news television channel and web service, and he's worth an estimated $50 billion. So he is one of the richest men in the entire world. Politically, he was very much opposed to Brexit, very much opposed to Donald Trump, and I think a year on, he still feels much the same way. But it's his attitude towards London, the city, and Brexit that really interests me. Now, yesterday morning, he was being interviewed by Nick Ferrari on LBC. This is what he had to say.
Well, I thought it was not the best thing for the UK. I still don't think it was the best thing for UK. It had nothing to do with the building. We will still have an enormous commitment here in London. I think London and New York are the two financial centers, and it's really hard to see either one of them losing that mantle. They might not grow as fast. Conceivably, they could contract a little bit. But Brexit for the UK means there's going to be a lot fewer jobs, probably for the people that voted for Brexit, and in America there's going to be a lot fewer jobs for the people that voted for Donald Trump because of his policies. So you think that it's good for you, but it really isn't.
Well, he sort of toned it down a bit, because 2 weeks ago in Boston he was speaking. He said Brexit was the stupidest thing any country has ever done, apart from the election of Donald Trump. So he toned it down a little bit. Why does he think Brexit's going to be bad? Well, he's worried about us accessing labour from all over the world. So he's a big supporter in open borders and in the free movement of people. And yet, folks, there's a mixed message here, isn't there? Because on the one hand, he says Brexit's bad, it could lead to contraction, and on the other, he's voted with his feet. The new building he opened today, he spent £1 billion building. It's just round the corner from Mansion House, right in the heart of the City of London. He employs 4,000 people in London, working for Bloomberg, and says he wants to up that to 8,000 people. So, I don't know about you. I'm personally getting pretty tired of people talking down the United Kingdom, people talking down the City of London. I think there are grounds for a lot more optimism, and I think really we shouldn't be listening to the likes of Mr. Bloomberg, but maybe you have a different opinion. My view is, ultimately, whatever your political opinion, money talks, and London still is the most desirable place in the world to do financial services business in terms of language, culture, education for kids, access to golf courses. There's a whole host of reasons why London is still the number one choice. I remain optimistic and bullish about it. I just wish that people like Michael Bloomberg, and actually, come to that, the chief executive of Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein, another American businessman, who last week put out a tweet saying he'd been in Frankfurt, what a great time he'd had, and how he might be spending more time there now because Brexit would happen. I'd like these big international global financiers to get over their political opinions, just to get on and concentrate with business. I'll be optimistic, I'll be pessimistic. Are you feeling upbeat about our future, about the city? If you are, call me on 0345 6060 973. If you're downcast and depressed and think it's all a disaster, well, of course, you can text me on 84850, and you can tweet virtually any opinion using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch me on Facebook Live from here in Washington and comment there too. And our first caller of the evening is Matt from Hounslow, who is a new caller to the show. Matt, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Nice to meet you, first-time caller. This is the first time I've spoken to you as well.
Welcome. Yep.
I truly support it. I believe in it. The reason I believe in it is because before my grandmother died, she showed me some photographs of what the empire was like before we split up. And I believe that the empire can come back. There is a lot of people that don't want that, especially this American who has a $1 billion building in London. I think he's very pessimistic towards Brexit. He doesn't believe in it, doesn't actually understand that it is something that has to happen. The British people voted for exit. Plus, the other thing as well, which is the EU is 1% of the world. Europe is 1% of the world. It doesn't take a brain scientist to work out that 99% of the world we're going to do trade with, plus the Commonwealth countries as well. I mean, come on, you know.
Now, Matt, I'm going to correct you slightly there. The EU is not 1% of the world. It's 15% of the world in terms of gross domestic product. However, I'd agree with the general point that 85% is outside. But when you say you want the empire back, what do you mean by that, Matt?
Well, basically for all our Commonwealth countries, plus us to start doing trade, which we should have done a long, long time ago. I don't understand why we haven't done this. Surely this country would prosper a hell of a lot when you've still got that 85% outside of Europe. I mean...
Well, that's always been my view, and I do think the English-speaking peoples of the world do have something in common, in terms of legal systems, contract laws, and much, much else. And the reason, Matt, we haven't done much about it is because as EU members, as part of their customs union, we've been banned from doing so. But that's not to say that the European market isn't important. It's 15% of global GDP, but it is 40% of our export market. So it does matter. But, hey, there's a big new world out there. Matt, I thank you very much indeed. Keith says the only people spoiling Brexit are the government. And I agree with that because Peter asked me on Facebook, why is Brexit failing? Well, Keith, I think, has answered that for you beautifully. And Mike says there's nothing optimistic or patriotic about Brexit. Just scrap the whole blooming thing and restore some common sense to the nation. What, Mike? Hand us back to Mr. Juncker, you mean? And those fanatics that want a European army, an aggressive foreign policy? I don't think so. Yark is calling me from Chelmsford. Good evening, Yark.
Good evening, Nigel, and nice to speak to you.
Nice to speak to you. So Bloomberg is on the one hand downbeat about what Brexit means for the UK, and yet on the other hand wants to employ 4,000 more staff. I mean, work that out for me.
No, he's so full of crap. I listened to his comments this morning. The one thing he said as well was he was saying in a couple of years' time you're going to go to the shop, to Tesco, wherever, and the fruit and veg, there's not going to be no fruit and veg because there's no one picking them, which is it's such a load of crap.
Just keep the language gentler, Yark. It is pre the watershed. No, I must admit, I've said this to people. I've said, well, before 2004, before Poland and Lithuania joined the European Union, were the strawberries rotting in the fields of Lincolnshire? And the answer, of course, is no. But he clearly, Yark, understand this. Bloomberg is committed to a world without borders. So that was what he was defending, I think. And that's his political ideology. And I guess that Brexit and Trump gave that view a hell of a kicking back in 2016. But ultimately, isn't he a pragmatist? Doesn't money talk? And if London's the best place to be, hey, he's going to stay here with his business, isn't he?
Yeah. So just to add to that, Nigel, before 2004, I was here after school, as a South African on a 2-year work visa. I was picking strawberries alongside Polish people, and they were on similar type of visas that what we were back then. You will remember back then there were many, a lot more South Africans, Australians, New Zealanders in the UK.
There were.
When there was a flood of Eastern Europeans into the UK, they stopped those visas. So there are so many options. They are just alluding to, saying that the UK is going to crash.
Do you know, Yark,
going to be no more
in the
later.
80s,
There's so many options.
In the 80s and 90s, when I worked in London, virtually everybody that pulled a pint or cut my hair came from Canada, New Zealand, Australia, or one of the Commonwealth countries, and they got a 6-month or a 1-year visa. They came, spent their time here and went home, and you're absolutely right. We opened the door unconditionally to Eastern and Central Europe, not just for people to come and work, but indeed to come and settle as well, and then the Commonwealth stopped coming. Yark, you've brought back some memories for me, actually quite good ones, and I thank you. Work permits and visas are one thing, automatic rights to settle are quite another. Steve in Romford is my next caller. Steve, have you had enough of people like Bloomberg talking our country down?
Well, he's not really talking the country down. He's got so much money, he can afford to do whatever he wants to do. So it doesn't make any difference at all. The main point is, here is a guy that's employing thousands of people in the UK. Now, he can be realistic to that. You can be as upbeat as you like. You don't employ thousands of people. So therefore, it is you personally. He's employing people. Now, at the end of the day, you're 100% right. He might have bought £1 billion property. That £1 billion property is probably now worth 1.2 billion. So the fact that he's bought the £1 billion property is neither here nor there. He's making money on that. The fact is, if he employs 4,000 people, and that reduces to 3,000 people, or 3,500 people, then it's going to have an effect. And if every mega-rich business person in the country did exactly the same, then there's going to be an issue.
But here's the kicker, Steve. He's saying he's got 4,000 people in that building, but he's looking to increase it to 8,000 people. So on the one hand, his business brain is saying to him, London is still the right place to be. It is still the financial centre of Europe. Whether Brexit puts it up a bit or down a bit, it's going to remain the centre. And yet the other half of his brain, the political, New York Democrat, Hillary supporting brain, keeps saying it's a disaster. Isn't the lesson of this, Steve, that ultimately, whatever businessmen think about politics, in the end, they make decisions based on their pocket?
Of course they do, and the facts are is he might want to employ more people, and I hope he does employ more people.
Yeah,
Nobody knows what Brexit's going to... I mean, the fact is with I bring in product from Europe and from the Far East and from outside other countries as well, and every single product has gone up 15%. Purely because of exchange rate.
Well, so what about, Steve, the even bigger depreciation that happened in sterling from 2010 until 2016? How did you cope with that?
Well, the facts are is if you take from 2010 to 2016, the exchange rate, if you look at the exchange rate over that period of time, it's better than it is today, and it's better than it was for the last 18 months.
No, Steve. Sterling fell more sharply from 2010 to 2016 than it has done since Brexit. Fact. Anyway, listen, thank you. I know, Steve, you're concerned. You're in business. I understand that. Multi-billionaire and former mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, has got me confused, folks, because on the one hand, he says Brexit is the stupidest thing any country has ever done, apart from Trump, of course. He then comes to London, tones it down a bit and says it's not the best thing, and then, moments later, says that his company, Bloomberg, have an enormous commitment to London as he opens a £1 billion sterling brand new building with 4,000 staff and the prospect of employing 4,000 more. I am getting tired and bored with this constant negativity we're getting from the global elites, because we had the same thing from the boss of Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein, last week, saying maybe his guys would all move out to Frankfurt. Let me tell you something. Deutsche Bank have just taken a long-term 20-year lease in the City of London on a vast amount of office space. If they're doing it, if Bloomberg's doing it, frankly, my view is their political opinions don't matter. In the end, money talks, and I think there's much more to be optimistic about than be pessimistic about. Robin says the worst thing we ever did was join, not to leave. Tom says, give an actual belief in Brexit and I will be optimistic. Well, if only the government gave us some vision. And Helena says Brexit is a farce. Well, you could argue Brexit is a farce regardless which side of the fence you're on, because we're not really cracking on with it. Anderson is calling me from Nottingham and is a new caller. Good evening.
Good evening. Hi, Nigel. Brilliant. Glad to speak to you for the first time caller. And don't worry, Nigel, people just don't have a vision yet. Brexit will be a good thing. Just people aren't conditioned yet to have that vision. It will come.
Is that because of a lack of leadership coming from the Prime Minister and our senior politicians?
Absolutely. They're directionless, they're rudderless, mixed messages, confusion. If I was in a leadership role, that's not the kind of profile I want to be signalling out to let people follow me over the hill, so to speak. It's just an absolute shambles at the moment. But just coming back to your Mayor Bloomberg thing, he isn't going anywhere. Yeah. You know, what people got to realise, the City of London itself is actually an independent place inside of the United Kingdom. Even the Queen needs permission to come into the City of London. So he isn't going anywhere. It's got different rules. It's a little mini haven that they go through. So the financial sector isn't going anywhere, I can assure you.
No, I think I'd rather agree with that. But Anderson, I want to broaden this out, because whenever we talk about financial services, whether it is, pension funds or insurance or foreign exchange or whatever products it is, we always think, it's the City of London, it's Canary Wharf, it's a little bit of St James's. Actually, there are lots of people, Anderson, employed in Nottingham in financial services, as there are in Cardiff and Edinburgh and York and Bath and wherever you go. And the fact is that financial services is, in terms of employment, Britain's biggest single industry. It employs people absolutely everywhere. And I believe, having spent 20 years in the commodities business, a small niche part of it, I do believe that the British government taking back control of Britain's biggest industry should give us a huge advantage. So I'm upbeat, I'm optimistic, Anderson. Do you think Theresa May is capable as leader of presenting the kind of vision that we need to hear?
No, because she sold it completely upside down, back to front. Obviously, she doesn't know whether she's to remain or she wants to leave. Obviously, she's got a cabinet that's sort of mixed. No, she's actually deluded and confused. What she has to do is look at UK PLC for the benefits that it actually has. And you mentioned Deutsche Bank earlier before. Absolutely right. Yeah. These big corporations aren't going anywhere. And again, it's the corporatocracy, again, the Bloombergs, the Lord Blankfeins, JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, all that lot. They've just, people have got to do their research and understand these people and what they stand for. If they
all the people who the voters of Nottingham said, we don't want telling us how to live our lives. Anderson, I thank you very much indeed for your first-time call to LBC. Stephen says to me on Twitter, I'm very optimistic about Brexit. I think we will thrive after an initial period of readjustment. Let's just be more positive. Bravo, Stephen. I am completely and utterly with you. I've got a caller from Finland. Phil is in Finland. Good evening, Phil.
Yeah, good evening, Nigel. Firstly, I think you've got it a bit wrong a bit confused over what Bloomberg's actually saying. You said it yourself. Yes, the people he's going to employ within the city are not going to lose their jobs, and certainly not in the short term. But he did say those who generally voted for Brexit, and I think what you read into that is those who are not in the city.
You could be right. No, you could be right. That's who he's right, and that's who I'm afraid are going to lose their jobs over the long period. Because I think this is where you and most of our statesmen have got this wrong. We're living in the past. Look at what's happening in China. Look at what's going to happen in India, in all these developing countries. We're rather like Nigel. Look at Luxembourg. 1% basically of the population of EU, yet it has got the highest per capita. Now, if we want to be in the same situation as that, Phil, hang on. Let's just examine why Luxembourg has done so remarkably well, because it set itself up as a tax haven at the heart of the European Union, with extraordinary deals on corporation tax for major multinationals, with tobacco taxes, alcohol taxes, diesel and petrol taxes far lower than all their surrounding neighbours. Phil, Luxembourg have done it, despite the European Union, by frankly ignoring all the rules.
Well, no, I agree, and that's what you could make a very similar analogy to what Britain could end up doing itself.
Well, and why not, Phil? And why not, Phil? And why not, Phil? Why? Corbyn says, if Brexit's a disaster, Mrs May will turn the UK into a low-tax, low-regulatory economy. I would argue, Phil, we should be doing that anyway.
Well, that's I guess, Nigel, where Remainers and Brexit is totally, on opposite sides of the fence. As far as I'm concerned, the EU works, for all its faults, and it has got many. I would totally agree with that. The institutions need to be, perhaps even root and branch rearranged. But
How?
Well, for one reason, Nigel,
it's not possible. But it's not possible, Phil.
As skillful at oratory as you are, was actually on the right side here. And for the time that we were in Europe, we were fully committed to Europe rather than just dragging our heels all the time. Because quite frankly, I've travelled, as perhaps you have, around most of the world, and there is no one place more stable overall, taking in all factors, than Europe. Anywhere in the world, I challenge you. Yes, you can go to Australia, you can go to Canada, you can go...
Sure, loads of places.
These small, yes,
loads of places.
Small in population, Nigel. Just look.
So how do you view, Phil? How do you view, Phil?
Of the world's population. Where are you coming from? We're going to lose our influence. Europe is a fantastic...
Hang on, Phil. Well, there's no democracy, is there? And they're crushing it in Catalonia as we speak, with the full support of the unelected bureaucracy in Brussels. Phil, you may have your vision of Europe. All I would say to you is, not only Brexit, look what happened yesterday in the German parliament when a new right-wing party, 92 of them took their seats. Look what happened a fortnight ago in Austria with the elections. Look what happened this weekend with the Czech Republic. Phil, the theory of Europe may be good, but in practice it doesn't work. Had it proved itself to be reformable, maybe things could have been different, but frankly it didn't. Phil, honestly, I understand you're very, very strongly in favour of the project. You believe in what it is, but I just don't think it's working. I'm going to quickly go to Toby in Didcot. Toby, do we need some more positivity, or is Phil right to be scared about Britain outside of this European Union?
Hi, Nigel. I am on the positive side. So I think what I'd love to see in Britain is some more of the post-war gumption and the positive can-do attitude. Build some great businesses from there. I'd love to see it right now and starting to grow more and more within the population. And I think, on a really positive note, I think the UK could help shape some kind of new EU from outside that union.
Toby, so do I. So do I. Because do you know what? We all live in a very close geography. There are loads of issues that affect all of us because they cross borders, whether it's pollution or crime or whatever it is. And Toby, I want a cooperative Europe of sovereign nation states working together as friends and neighbours, but not surrendering control to a bunch of old men in Brussels. Would that be the kind of direction you'd like this to go in?
Yeah, and I had a couple of things maybe to watch out for. One thing that's often not pointed out is we talk about the EU. Sometimes it's conflated with Europe, which is obviously not right. But really what we're talking about in terms of trading is two main countries, Germany and France. And I'd love again to see some more positive input there from those governments together with the UK.
Well, of course, Toby, you're right, because the UK economy is as big as the 20 smallest economies in the single market. So in realistic terms, you're right. It's only a handful of countries with really big economies, but we wish all the small ones well too. We really, really do. Toby, thanks for your positivity. As the former New York Mayor, Michael Bloomberg, and multi-billionaire, says Brexit is a huge mistake, whilst at the same time opening a new big office in London and talking about employing thousands more people, I'm asking you whether it's time for a bit more optimism. Enough of all this global negativity. But today, David Davis appeared before a committee in Parliament, and he was asked by Member of Parliament Seema Malhotra if there would be a Commons vote ahead of Brexit.
And which point do you envisage Parliament having a vote?
As soon as possible thereafter.
This Parliament,
as soon as possible thereafter. Yeah.
As soon as possible thereafter. So the vote.
The undertaking we've given.
Could be after March 2019.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could be. It depends when it concludes. I mean, Mr. Barnier, remember, has said he'd like.
The vote of our Parliament, the UK Parliament, could be after March 2019.
Yes, it could be.
Okay.
Could be. The thing
Which
to remember.
Would be,
well, it can't come before we have the deal.
What would happen at that point? What would be happening at that point with the European Parliament?
We have said that it is our intent and our expectation that we will bring it to the British Parliament before it goes to the European Parliament.
So it's a bit messy, really, isn't it? Because Davis had said he thought negotiations could go on until the last minute before the final day of the UK leaving, which would then mean, as he answered Seema Malhotra, the vote would happen effectively after we'd left. And yet, a little bit later on, Theresa May told the Commons that it's absolutely clear that she's confident that because of the interests of both sides, we can get to a situation where Parliament can vote on a deal prior to the date we actually leave. So, once again, it's a government at sixes and sevens on Brexit. It's a government that seems to have absolutely no clear direction. It's a government that is split on the issue, and it's a government that is failing, I think, to put out any positive messages whatsoever, and maybe that's why we listen to Michael Bloomberg when he's negative, or we listen to Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs when he's negative. It's not being countered by our political leaders here. I think enough of the negativity. Let's get on and make a success of Brexit. That is my feeling. And given that despite everything Bloomberg says, he's about to recruit 4,000 more staff in London and says he remains enormously committed to London and that it will stay as Europe's financial centre. In many senses, what's not to like? Antonio is my next caller from Willesden. Antonio, good evening.
Nigel, good evening. Pleasure to talk to you at last. I actually rang you once before, but you got caught up in some bomb scare in America.
I did. Well, so this is your first proper call to the show, and welcome to you.
Thank you very much. Very kind of you. Nigel, while respecting your views, I completely disagree with them. I'll say that. But I just want to ask you a question. I'm coming from the side of a citizen of the world. I've been in this fantastic country of yours 30 years. But I am what you would class as a EU migrant. I've seen the EU grow over the years from the time when my country was taken out of fascism to what it is today. One thing I just can't get my head around. What is positive about Brexit? What is positive about a divorce? I've seen in the last year the pound absolutely tank. This summer, I got 101. I paid 101 pounds. Hang on, Nigel. I paid 101 pounds for 100 euros. The reputation of this nation is
Antonio, I'm going to stop you there. Factually, you're wrong in a sense. Has the pound fallen since Brexit? Yes. Did the pound fall far more in the years that preceded Brexit? Yes. So all that you've seen since Brexit is a trend that was in place already. And what's to be positive about with Brexit? Well, do you know what, Antonio? We are going to take back our birthright, our ability in this country to govern ourselves and to do so in a free, open democracy, not to have our laws made somewhere else, not to have our courts overruled. And that's not something you can measure in terms of money, but it is something you can measure, hopefully, in terms of self-confidence and belief in who we are as a nation. I mean, what on earth is wrong with that?
Nigel, but you have these things right now. I listened very carefully to everything you said during and after the referendum, and I will say one thing: you were by far not the people I disagreed with the most. But one thing I want to tell you: you have that right now. For example, your arguments on immigration. One thing I have to say to you: I completely agree with those that say when in Rome, do as the Romans did. I had to do it. But one thing about immigration: you got successive governments in the UK, as my governments back home do right now, had the opportunity to veto people coming into this country, to apply the laws of the EU. Why was that an issue? It wasn't done because successive governments in the UK chose not to do it.
Well, Antonio, look, the question's quite fundamental, isn't it? Should we in this country, should residents in this country who vote and pay their taxes and are British people, should they have a British passport or an EU one? That is the question. And what Brexiteers said is we want a British passport. And we're very happy for people from the European Union and the rest of the world to come here on work permits, to provide skills that we need. What we're not happy is to have an open door for people who can automatically have the right of settle, because that doesn't simply work. And honestly, Antonio, all we did with Brexit is to say we want to be like normal countries all over the rest of the world. But let me just ask you, in the light of what the Goldman Sachs bosses said and what Bloomberg have said, I mean, do you think that their pessimism, certainly their public pessimism, if not their actions, to do with the city and British business, you feel this may all come true, do you?
Well, look, I'll say one thing to you, okay? As I stated to you, I absolutely disagree with a lot of things that have been said, and a lot of things that have been said about the EU. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I will also say one thing. Regardless of the fact that I disagree with the vote, regardless of the fact that someone like me was barred from the vote, even though I'm a UK taxpayer and have been for a hell of a long time, yeah? I will say one thing. The vote has happened, okay? Yeah. It has happened. There has been a vote. People have voted, all right, whether I agree with the methods or not, and that should be respected, because if it's not, then we have a deficit of democracy. Do I agree with Lloyd Blankenfheim? Maybe. The honest answer with you is the signs I'm not seeing are maybe not that good, but, what I'm saying to you is it's happened, all right? It has happened. It's been voted democratically.
So let's get on with it. Yeah,
but let's do it. One thing you said before I came on was the government is all over the place. I wholeheartedly agree with you.
Yeah,
absolutely.
No, they really are. Antonio, listen, I thank you for your call. I've got a load more lined up. I must keep cracking on. Chris in Blackheath is my next caller. Chris, should we be upbeat and positive or down and depressed?
We can't be upbeat and positive for a lot of reasons. You're one of them. It's the message out there. Let me see, without, I'm not going to be funny this time. I'm just going to be just points up. You're very charismatic, Nigel. The thing is, that first call you had, you said, we bring the empire back. The empire was a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. People at the time liked it. But
well, I did. Hang on, Chris. I did ask him what he meant by the empire, and what he meant was trade with the Commonwealth. So I did drill down on that. And actually, Chris, isn't it remarkable that we're the only country in the world that has a great relationship with its former colonies, and we should celebrate that, surely?
Well, let's move on. Now, you said about being optimistic. I'm optimistic that Donald Tusk actually said, Brexit doesn't have to happen. So I'm optimistic about that. I might be the only person in the country who's optimistic about that, but I am.
Oh, no, Sir Vince Cable's with you, Chris. Don't worry about that.
But politicians failed. You failed. The politicians in this country failed. The politicians in Europe failed. Okay, you failed to find a way around making England look like we are the nasty country. And Nigel, that's something that we've all got to live up to. Our politicians failed us. The EU politicians failed us. Now, on top of that, fueled Brexit, when you was actually leading the actual referendum from your side, because you weren't the leader, but from your side you was leading it. You put up posters of Turkish people coming here in their millions in their droves and things.
I know,
like that.
Absolutely.
Nigel, what you did, okay, you might have got across the line, but what's happened now is, if we talk in rugby terms, the ball's been held up. The reason being is because the language that you used was emotive. It was immoral. It was wrong.
Sometimes, Chris, the truth is really, really difficult for people to face up to. But it's because of that truth that you're seeing results in Austria, the Czech Republic, and right across Europe, because frankly, Mrs. Merkel and her friend Mr. Juncker made a catastrophic mistake with saying anybody that comes across the Mediterranean and sets foot on EU soil can stay regardless of who they are. Most of them would never ever have qualified for refugees. I've had enough of American billionaires talking down our country. I think there's a fair bit to be positive about. And when Bloomberg says we've made a terrible mistake and yet at the same time opens a brand new building in the city and says he will employ thousands of people, I believe money talks and there's a lot to be optimistic about. London will stay the financial centre of Europe, whatever happens. So I'm asking you, are you upbeat and positive or are you downcast and negative? Hi Nigel, I get via text. Brexit makes me smile every single day. I am happy, optimistic and upbeat for our global future, says Tina. Nigel, I am being relocated to Frankfurt next month. It's not hot air from my employer, one of the biggest companies in the world. It's set in stone. So, some of us are definitely being moved. It's not all that bad, though. For those trapped in generation rent, it's an opportunity for higher living standards and a better chance of buying a house. Well, actually, that is true. There's an awful lot of people working in London, people under the age of 40, working in London, working incredibly long hours, and still cannot even get their feet on the housing ladder. And the fact you're being moved to Frankfurt, do you know what? And it's anonymous, this message. People move back and forth from financial centres all the time. I'm feeling really optimistic about staying in the EU. With a few adjustments and a bit of time, I'm sure we will prosper. Really can't wait until this Brexit malarkey is done and dusted. Les, you're living on a different planet, matey. We've had the vote. The war is over. We're leaving. It's just a question of how long it will take and by what method. Caroline says, I'd hire a migrant before a Remainer any day. Many of the migrants I know, especially from Iran, who came 40 years ago, they all voted leave. They know what happens when you let a certain ideology take over. OK. Jamie is my next caller. He's calling from Romford, and he's a new caller to the show. Good evening, Jamie. Jamie? No, I'm not getting you, Jamie. There we are. He's obviously got bored. Let's go to Birmingham and go to Matthew. Matthew, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Farage. How you doing?
Hello. Fine. So, are you upbeat and optimistic, or do we have reason to be genuinely scared about what's going to happen to the city and the rest of British industry?
Well, our optimism depends on how much we can believe the things that we were told at the time of the referendum. And you said repeatedly during the referendum that it's the unelected commission that is the sole source of EU law. And I was just wondering
Yes.
if you're not, whether you were telling the whole story with that.
The whole, sir, the absolute whole truth. The people who make legislation in Europe that affects every one of our commercial companies, regardless of the fact, Matthew, that over 80% of the British economy doesn't trade overseas, has never traded overseas, and will never trade overseas, and yet are bound by those laws. Those laws are proposed by an unelected bureaucracy and can only, for their genuine amend and improvement in years to come, the source of that is the unelected bureaucracy as well. And what the European Parliament does, effectively, is to act like the House of Lords. We are a revising chamber who can delay things, stop things, hold them up, make the Commission think again. So the sole source of law comes from those we cannot vote and cannot remove. Yes, Matthew.
So your job, what's your title within the EU? It's MEP, right?
As I say, it's a bit, think of it like the House of Lords. They are the powers of the European Parliament.
So you're an MEP, which means that it's your job to amend, as in produce pieces of law that go into the law that's proposed, reject and approve, or simply reject any proposal by the EU, by the Commission. Any proposal,
which I've been doing, Matthew, which I've been doing for 18 years. I've never voted for a single piece of new European law. I've abstained many times, but I've generally voted against all of it. I don't think that's the right way to make law. I think that those that make the law should be directly accountable to the electors, and in the European system, they're not.
But given that it's the MEPs, as in people like yourself, who can completely change, completely modify, and completely reject any legislation proposed by the Commission. And even if the Commission was the soul of Lucifer himself, then it wouldn't make a difference, because it's down to you whether or not laws go through, and you can completely alter them.
You could.
Job.
You could if the European Parliament wasn't one acting against the concept of national interest and for the idea of a European, which I believe to be false interest, and secondly, the European Parliament is as integrationist and as expansionist as the Commission itself. But Matthew, that's not our debate this evening. Our debate this evening is, we voted Brexit. I can tell from your tone that you're not a fan of it, but are you really as pessimistic as the boss of Goldman Sachs would have you believe, that everyone's off to Frankfurt?
We've been having these negotiations and having this public discourse on the idea that the single market is essentially a free trade deal, that we can have the equivalent or better outside of the single market, whereas in fact it's nothing to do with tariffs, it's more to do with regulation. And you say that regulation causes a problem and that we want to get rid of the bureaucracy of the EU, but in fact the bureaucracy regulations will only go up when we leave the EU, because the whole point of being in the single market is it means you can trade with other countries than the EU as if you were trading like to your neighbour within the UK. The same.
Matthew, I understand that. I understand that, Matthew. But what about the 80% of British businesses who have never traded overseas and never will? Why should they be bound by a set of rules designed for international trade? Surely that is nuts.
The EU law tends to focus on interstate trade. So and you got to remember the fact that we will regulate anyway. This idea that post-Brexit these businesses will no longer be bound by regulation is a farce, because we will make laws. Most laws are for consumer protection anyway. It would be a bad thing if after Brexit we suddenly just didn't have laws for.
Matthew, I'm not proposing a complete laissez-faire, but I am saying that maybe it makes sense for local businesses in Birmingham who are selling car insurance, let's say, not to be bound by a whole series of EU laws that make the cost of running their business more expensive, that tie up the management in time when they could be making more profits and employing more people. Matthew, that's all I'm saying. Look, I'm not pretending Brexit ends it all. I thank you for your call. My last caller this evening is Assad, who was calling from Gants Hill. Assad, good evening. Are there reasons to be cheerful, Assad, or should we be downbeat, depressed and reaching for the bottle?
Hi, Nigel. Good evening.
Good evening.
I mean, I think it's a very difficult question to answer at this point, but I think what we need to do right now is to be honest about, whatever case we put forward. And then the biggest complaint that I have from you, at this point, because I'm talking to you, is, the analogies that you gave, like things like that, becoming a low-rate tax haven, UK can become somehow like Luxembourg, is just like absolutely silly to say. It's just like saying Venezuela can become Qatar because they can sell oil. I mean, you can't compare like this. I've heard you saying...
What you can say, Assad, is that you believe in the principle of competition between countries. Competition on tax, competition on regulation. That is my view of the future, as opposed to those who believe in the European Union, who think we should be harmonised, homogenised and perhaps even pasteurised in with our European neighbours.
But Nigel, the Luxembourg being successful because they are in EU, which means the businesses can work in EU, can do business in EU, and can avoid tax by being in Luxembourg.
They have been.
Exactly.
They have been.
I'm not in favour of that, but at the same time...
They have been an exemption. Assad, they've been an exemption. The EU's turned a blind eye whilst they've got on and done their thing. Assad, are you optimistic? Are you bullish or bearish for our future post-Brexit?
I think there is nothing to be optimistic on both sides, neither UK or EU.
All right. So you think it's bad news and it won't get better, yeah?
Yeah, it's just like you saying that, I've heard you saying that people do business with people. It's not countries against countries.
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
We don't really need a trade deal with the EU. If that's the case, then why do we need to be out of EU to do trade deals with, as you say, with Commonwealth?
Because the EU banned us from doing it. Assad, I've got to go. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage